Hello and welcome to this Thanksgiving week edition of the Media Roundtable, Industry Edition, where we're going to dive deep into the events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and buyers who support it, or as we call them, the Chief Audio Officers. I'm your host, Dan Granger. We are sorry to miss James Cridlin, editor at Podcast Business Journal this week, but he'll be back with us soon. So we hope he's enjoying his travels. But I do have some very talented and expert fellow agents of influence with me. We have Stew Redwine, Jennifer Laine, and Spencer Semonson all coming in to share their views on some of the stories that we're going to go through today. So, guys, welcome. Glad to have you with the program this morning.
Thank you.
Great to be with the program.
All right, couple stories that we're going to start with. Stu, I'm going to put you up first. There's an argument circulating. I've seen this one before. Maybe you have too, that less is more in ad copy. Can you share a little bit about what's been reported here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the article you're referring to from Westwood One, less is more, reduce audio ad copy word count and improve effectiveness. A nice statement made there with that headline, as if there's one move to make to improve the performances of an ad. I think what's important here is a study that was done in the UK on audio ads, that by eliminating 10 words of audio copy, they're able to increase the creative standout score by 1%. And by eliminating 10 words of audio copy, they could increase web traffic by 0.25%. Rather small numbers on the face of it, but nevertheless an improvement. I think it's so critical. And we had James Cridlin on. I know he's not with us this week, but before, in talking about studies in audio advertising that come out of the United Kingdom, that the United Kingdom's experience of audio has been wildly different than the United States of America's from the word go. There were no ads for decades and decades and decades. And to this day, the ads are very limited. So the temperature of the audience there is different. I think that's one thing. I think that I thought of in looking at this is they're saying less is more. Less words is more. Thomas Jefferson, right? Never use two words when one will do. I think the important thing is this. It's about using the right words. It's Mark Twain's. What's the difference between lightning and a lightning bug? So if we're analyzing a bunch of ads in audio here, we know in general, using our framework that we have at Oxford Road Audiolytics, that most ads are a C student anyway, a C or a D student. So sure, eliminating 10 crummy words from a crummy script probably does make it better. But I don't believe that makes the case that always saying less is going to ensure that you cause people to have think more fondly of your brand or take action based on your brand. Because we also know from persuasion that the more you tell, the more you sell. The longer that you can talk to somebody, the longer those ad reads are with the personal connection to the host, the more likely it is that people are going to feel good about a brand. They're going to remember a brand. They're going to notice it, and they're going to transact with it either in that moment or when they have need for it down the road. So this is one of those that's like, it's a nice headline. Remember, it's from the UK. And this isn't necessarily something that's true at all times for every audio advertisement.
That's actually a really good point, just because, I mean, we all know, brevity is the soul of wit. But when it comes to things more in line with influencer marketing or like the persuasiveness of audio, you really need that intimacy, and being quick and to the point doesn't always get you that. So yeah, branding, sure. If you want to get your message high reach, sure. Be quick with it, get to the point. But I 100% agree. In podcasting or longer form, take the time, roll out your message, get what feels like added value to the read, and make it really your own.
Also, just in regards to digestibility, I think like it's common sense. Shorter ads for brands, like if there are too many words, your brain doesn't want to put all those words together and remember them. If you're saying 3 words, you're going to remember the 3 words. Not that every ad should be 3 words, but the shorter it is, the stickier it is, and the more you're able to remember it. And I think you just recall it later more easily.
I was going to say there's more on this later, that it's context. I think that's the main thing that strikes me here is it's the context of the country that you're advertising in, right? And its experience of that specific channel. And again, I'd love to hear all of these ads. If I'm taking 10 words out of the best 180 words that you've ever heard that are perfectly crafted and intended to reach that audience, it's probably not going to help performance. But if I'm taking 10 words out of what most audio advertising is, which is about a 50 to a 60% score, yeah, of course it'll help, because those 10 words weren't doing anything anyway. Those 10 words were in the way.
How much does it vary by ad style? Like, I would assume a live read would need to be longer than a pre-recorded ad, obviously, but maybe
one would assume.
Yeah.
It used to be that way. I mean, look, a big part of this is you have to consider the source. And when you're a media publisher, if you're a radio publisher, you're running, 20 minutes of ad units an hour, but your clocks are fixed. What used to happen, because I worked in the big corporate world of that for a long time, is there used to be a lot of flexibility. So if you bought a live read, the host might go 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And we have seen that throughout the history of podcast as well. You've got some shows that don't worry about the clocks, they just go. Well, the more corporate they get, and we saw this in radio, they start to cut those times down so that you've only got 60 seconds. And so if I'm in the business of selling media and I only have so many seconds or minutes per hour to sell, what do I want? I'm like a restaurant. I want to turn the tables over faster so I can get more, more people and more seats. And so there's always you have to consider that the publishers, the platforms, the creators are always going to want to highlight any good news about short form being better. But, the bulk of my 2 decades in this business is exactly what you said, Stu. The more you tell, the more you sell. We've tested it. We've seen time and time again, the longer ad outperforms. Now, to your point, if you are in a situation where the clock is fixed and you only have 60 seconds, would you rather have the host elaborating on their personal experience than getting one more feature mentioned? Probably, yeah, because that's potentially a higher value to the consumer to increase their trust. But if that's not the case, and we're just saying, a 30 is going to work better than a 60, that's nonsense. And we know that's not true. So you have to really consider your sources. And when somebody says on another continent that there's a 1% increase in some metric that doesn't actually correlate to ROI, I'm calling bullshit on this one, because I think there's too many incentives for people to want it to be shorter. The advertisers that we represent, we want them to have longer ads to the extent possible. And if I could get a 10-minute ad for the price of a 1-minute ad, I'd take that 10 times out of 10. So watch out for these stories, and thanks for flagging that one, Stu. All right, let's move on. Next topic, Jennifer. Sounds like there's some news over at Spotify with respect to audiobooks. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a piggyback conversation on an announcement that was made last week. So Spotify announced that discovery for podcasts and audiobooks is going to get a boost from Google Cloud's AI. So specifically, Spotify is addressing podcast and audiobook discovery issues by leveraging Google Cloud's AI tools. The platform aims to enhance content discovery by using their LLM to analyze its vast library consisting of 5 million podcasts and 350,000 ads. The interesting part here is so a similar announcement was made last week about or coming out of Bill Gates's Likewise. Likewise introduced a tool called Pix that was a product feature in Likewise that would enhance discovery in podcast, as well as make intelligent recommendations based on having agents learn your personal preferences. So similar here, we can assume, I mean, there wasn't reference of agents necessarily, although in this environment, I think it's safe to say that would be a main point. The difference here is the brand safety element. So the collaboration on Spotify's end also seeks to identify and mitigate harmful content, whereas the Likewise tool isn't necessarily doing that. So they're taking it one step further. We're going to see this a lot. Obviously, we're going to see a number of players pop up in this space. The capability of achieving this has never been easier. It kind of is a no-brainer from a production side or a network side. You might as well make it as easy as possible for listeners. I think audience patterns are going to head in this direction anyway, where they're going to demand it. And so I think this is just the second of a number of tools that will come into the space. It is really nice to see that brand safety is sort of front and center here, where you are able to search for or filter out harmful content.
Okay, so Jennifer, a few things on this. One, I mean, look, I think that audiobooks going onto these platforms is awesome, and I hope that we're able to do some really interesting sponsorships to the point of longer form is better, right? So imagine the advertising integrations you could do if one sponsor could attach themselves to the right book. So
Right.
I think that part's super cool. I guess the part that I'm curious about is who is deciding what is harmful content? And how does that brand safety actually work? Does that Catcher in the Rye? Is that Huck Finn? What are we talking about here when we talk about harmful content?
I think that's a really fair question, and one we definitely don't know the answer to. I think we can safely assume that since Spotify is partnering with Sounder for all of its brand safety initiatives, that Sounder would be critical in the development of this tool, and to a certain extent they would be making those somewhat subjective decisions based around different frameworks that are in place, like the GARM brand safety and suitability framework, which does have copy that relates to written content. So in this regard, like, I think it would be more written than it would necessarily podcast, because it's a book that's just being voiced over. And so I think that actually, like, and this would help you identify that. I mean, we've seen it with brand safety tools in the different dashboards, like you're able to search for and exclude. So I assume the functionality would be the same. Again, we haven't seen anything come to market, so I don't know.
That's super interesting. I was just thinking about the whole like adding to a book thing, just because content around books, which is generally under arts, is kind of difficult to find. That's not extremely dry. And there's always a need for it, especially in a B2B space or a parenting one, because that trends especially well with the female demographic. To the point about using AI discoverability tools, I'm glad that we're mining that a bit more, because I think all of the podcast apps and the audiobook apps at present aren't at the same level as video. And that's one of the main reasons that video has been able to scale, especially through YouTube. So, and also from a planning perspective, like I can't tell you how many times that things have been said they're lookalikes, when this just shows that have overlap in audience versus actually having content that matches to the thing that you're looking for. So all good stuff. I'm very excited about the interest.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this is a B2C announcement. So this is a consumer tool, as is the Likewise. It's definitely built around consumer discoverability and intelligent recommendations. I think like one way to describe this would be like how you could set up children's account in Netflix, and then it sort of limits what they're able to see in their own logged in version. They're not going to find dangerous or R-rated movies, as an example, mainly just like cartoons and nature shows, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like that's an applicable example of what's happening here. Intelligent recommendations based on content searchability for users, which again, like would have its value is from a B2B perspective as well. Just a completely different user journey and functionality.
Something I'm thinking of as we're seeing the increase in interest with audiobooks. They're getting more, highly produced and all of this. Prediction for 2024 is we'll be doing an influencer episode. A Media Roundtable episode where we're going to be talking about audio product placement. That's what I see coming down the line, is the specific products that are integrated into the actual text, the stories themselves. Of course,
nightmare.
Of course, there's
books are like
the
last sacred place.
Well, no, we're going to shove ads everywhere. There's nowhere to hide.
It's going to be.
This is why
I'm so thirsty for this Coca-Cola.
Books. I read books, paper versions.
Don't worry. We're going to have 3D ads popping out of those books soon enough. Don't worry. Stu, let's work together on the first like pivotal case study for a branded book. and really figure out a nice integration there. I think that's a good project for us.
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely not going to read it.
Yeah. What are you reading right now, Jennifer?
You'll listen to it, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm
We need
actually
We need
reading
places to
Demon.
start.
I'm reading Demon Copperhead, and it is a very dark book, and I love it. I think like it won the Pulitzer Prize, I think last year. It's by Barbara. Oh my gosh, I just spaced on her last name. Let me Google
I'm
it.
thinking maybe it sounds like more of a Tushy endorsement that we can integrate. I'm not sure which brand we'll pick.
It's by
anyway. Keep giving
Barbara,
us ideas. We'll find the right integration to put together.
Yeah, Barbara Kingsolver. Anyway, the brand integrations there, I think, would not pass a brand safety survey.
Depends on the brand.
But I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I think she's my favorite author. My favorite contemporary author I've ever read.
I love her too.
Outstanding. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Spencer reads 3 books a day on average. I'm probably lowballing it here, but she is probably the most I don't know, voracious reader I know. Okay, let's stop talking about our reading habits and let's talk about another story. How agencies are adapting to marketers' increased focus on the creator economy. So what does that mean? We're seeing a surge in demand for influencer-driven social media campaigns. And I think it used to be a lot of smaller brands, a lot of the D2C folks, stuff like that. And in the same way, we're seeing in audio a shift toward larger brands coming in. The creator economy is definitely seeing the same thing. Brands like Ford, TGI Fridays, Tinder, BMW, I mean, you name it, they're moving in. Obviously, brand safety is a big challenge that has to be contended with, but it's not stopping. I'm going to read you some stats that came out of this article. The creator economy today is sized at $250 billion. They're projecting that in 5 years, that'll be 480 billion. So almost double in the next 5 years. They're kind of saying a similar growth for podcast, except podcast is going like 2 to 4. So 250 to almost 500 is significant. There was an agency that just got bought called Movers and Shakers, bought by Stagwell for $15 million. People are making noise about that. I think people are just probably glad to see a little M&A coming out of this environment. But there's much bigger stories where Omnicom buys a company like Flywheel for $835 million. So this is a big business. And I think that we can expect to see the rise of influencer and big brands coming together. What's noteworthy about this is that now big brands are starting to carve out the execution of these sort of things for specialist agencies. Now, look, as a CEO of a specialist agency, that's obviously a good thing for us because it shows, like, why do we talk about the chief audio officer? Because this stuff is nuanced and it's weird, and you can't just shove it through the same manufacturing process as every other type of pre-produced unit. When you're dealing with people and the people become your speakers, that is a very different type of campaign to execute. So it's good to see that bigger dollars are starting to recognize the importance of expertise. One word of caution that I would say, the audio business, the modern audio business in podcast, which is kind of what everybody talks about and looks at, most of us came out of radio, and we had a precedent where we really were required to show ROI on everything that we did. And so all of the early sponsors that built the platforms and the networks and the ecosystem you see today were performance marketers. You don't have as much of that when you move into other social channels, where people are paying for posts and impressions and likes that may or may not correlate to actual ROI. Now, I think there's a lot of work being done to move into that direction. But what's kind of interesting is that the broader influencer marketplace is trying to figure out how to validate performance, whereas audio has been at performance, focused on performance at its core, and is now moving out to things that are less measurable and softer brand metrics. The important thing, if you're a brand, if you're a chief audio officer and you are trying to leverage specific capabilities in influencer is to make sure you do not lose sight of the metrics that got you there. And sometimes it's harder to do them reported. There are a lot of people buying impression only based campaigns and not trying to measure bottom of funnel performance. It's still possible. It's just hard. And so there's a lot of quote unquote, Sherpas that will show you the way on that. But I would advise anybody that's moving down that path to continue looking for parity with the ROI metrics you use in other channels. You don't have to suspend it there, even though it's not their forehand. But it's a good thing for the industry.
I think the creator economy is incredibly fascinating. It was an economy that didn't really exist in a meaningful way a decade ago. And it's sort of been on a roller coaster ride with every new social platform that pops up, or every new platform that pops up that allows for creators to have a platform to monetize. I think we've seen sort of the rise and the fall of Twitch and the rise of podcasts, and continue to rise, and the creator economy has so many different shapes. I think the corner of the creator economy that is totally unrelated to what we're talking about, but also just shows the potential, is live stream shopping, in especially the emergence and importance of live stream shopping in China. There was a woman who just last week did a 1-day live stream shopping event, and she ended up making $18 million over the course of selling. And she was selling based on her following alone and how religious they are in sort of trusting her recommendations. And everything was on the screen for about a half second. You literally had barely enough time to look at it and to click through before she was moving on. Obviously, this hasn't really become something that's popular in the US yet, but when it comes to like the creator economy and potential advertising opportunity, it's like the gold star for what could be possible. And I think the ways that sort of the way that trickles down to the US economy and different international economies outside of China will be incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, it's probably a series for us to just talk about the relationship between our core focus on audio and where does the line begin and end with influencer, and what are the differences in approach if you're trying to use that platform. Like one of the things I was reading about over the weekend was the revenue streams that are coming out of influencer platforms that have nothing to do with advertising. And I saw instances where some people are making 30 cents per subscriber to their YouTube channel per year. Some people are making as much as $10 per subscriber on their influencer channel. It is an unbelievably large and influential business. We probably just couldn't talk about it enough. So to be continued on that specific subject.
Sorry, one quick edit. It wasn't in 24 hours, it was in 7 days, and it was $18.7 million. But yeah, I think it is definitely a standalone episode, because it's not necessarily just how to do it with advertising, but like the different ways to monetize the channel based on channel, and that are sort of cross channel opportunity.
Awesome. Okay, so next story sounds like there's some new data around what genres podcast listeners are gravitating towards. Spencer, do you mind filling us in on that?
Yeah, it's the Spotify podcast trends report that just came out. And I know we're all very busy, so we all haven't read it, but I did. So here's the things that I actually found quite interesting within the report. Americans have been prioritizing comedy podcasts this year, and that's not that surprising. We've seen that year over year as true crime has gone down, but 35% are spent with comedy, which is double the second place winner of lifestyle and society and culture. Globally, parenting has gone up 88% year over year, an increase, and a 72% boost in business and tech news. And then there's also a lot of content around personal growth and self-improvement. And then also the thing that I thought was really interesting is that listening among 45 and older saw the strongest growth, with a 50% uptick in the US and notable increases in Europe. I'm not super surprised about comedy going up, because it's often intertwined with interview-based fare, and that is probably mostly based in the fact that video is continually rising, because it just works with comedy and interview. You don't have as many like hard facts that you have to continually pay attention to throughout, and it's not in like a journalistic endeavor that has a thread throughout. I think a lot of people have been on the fence in testing comedy due to like brand safety concerns, but with the amount of brands that are now testing into the genre, I think the ROI capabilities and penchant for long-term growth are more important than that aspect of the buy. And I'm also not really that surprised by self-improvement and mental health content rising, because I have done multiple internal reports looking through the content that works the best for our clients. And that's a thread through every genre, from sports to true crime to society and culture, and even leisure.
Sorry, Spencer, I want to clarify with you. Are you saying there is no correlation between which genres perform the best for brands and which genres are getting the most consumption? Or are you saying there is a correlation?
I'm saying that for specific to comedy, that correlates well to video. But yes, when it comes to certain threads that just work better content wise, it really doesn't matter on the genre. So say you have a brand and their main focus is either on a product that self-improves, a product that helps your mental health, or a product that targets a very specific demo. If you just look at that humanistic thread, a lot of times it really doesn't matter where you place your dollars. And then I definitely want to speak more to the 45 demo. I just find that really astonishing. And I know we talk a lot about how radio is on the way out and it's dying, which is a lie. But when you talk about its positive aspects, the main thing you always talk about is the fact that it contains an older demographic, and that's generally where the higher household income is, unless you pivot to educational content. And the fact that that's growing in podcasting is just another great boon to podcast spending. I think we're seeing that as the brands come in to actually spend their dollars versus straight DR.
Well, I think it has to happen. And one of the things with podcasting is that it is peculiar in how many people it doesn't get that are under like 24, right? But when you start getting into that age where you're more likely to own a home, you're thinking about the world around you in different ways, and really when you have a commute somewhere, that's when you're more likely to get into radio. And what's happening is, I think, over time, finally, every age bracket is just going to keep over indexing in this way. So I imagine in some number of years or months, we'll see that same statistic about 55 plus, right? It's going to have to keep growing. They're just going to have to get sick and tired, and the ease of use has to keep increasing for seniors to be able to use the platform. But there's no question that that's the future, is that the people that are getting the lion's share of AM FM radio listenership are going to continue to move on to streaming audio and podcast. The other thing I just want to share on this article that I thought was interesting is, look, why would those two genres, comedy and growth or business or personal development, why are those the ones? It could be, I mean, look, we have to allow that this is a Spotify report, and because they have algorithms that can kind of, there could be self-fulfilling prophecy if they wanted there to be. I'm not saying there is, but it could be unique to that platform. However, it would make sense to me that after the last few years we've all been through, people are kind of cynical right now and they need an escape. And I think that explains a lot of the comedy. I would also say that everybody working in the private sector right now is feeling more pressure than they were a couple years ago. And so that would, I think a lot of us had to like put on our clothes again, leave the house, and like go out there and start pounding the pavement a little more than we used to. People got to sing for their supper again. And so it's a good time to be doing self-improvement. Let's also remember that we're now just going into an election year. And I think that's going to start swinging it back a little bit further towards news and society and culture.
Well, but also I think if you think about those two genres specifically, they're really personal, and a lot of trust has to exist. And so like if you're listening to a comedian, like you actually really trust them to tell you the truth, and you trust that they understand you because their jokes relate to you. Otherwise you wouldn't be listening to them. And with personal growth, like you're trusting them to sort of shape your life. And like it's different with true crime or with sports, or like there isn't that level of sort of like intimacy and trust that exists in those two genres. And I actually think that that's a factor here as well.
Well, while you're on that topic, why don't you tell us about what brands are doing to look inward before weighing in on politics? You want to open up that can of worms?
I love that super smooth transition.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so article this week, Americans to brands look inward before weighing in on politics, per report. So the report we have, it was a huge article in Marketing Brew this week. We'll link it in our show notes. I'm going to go ahead and read this because it's a lot of data that I can't just rattle off the top of my head. But the 2024 election prompts brands to reconsider political involvement. So Morning Consult's election playbook reveals that 53% of American adults prefer corporations to avoid political or cultural issues, which is actually down from 61% in 2019, which I think that to me was the most surprising stat, that fewer people would want brands to avoid politics altogether. Gen Z and millennials are more divided, with 41% supporting brand advocacy. Topics like police support receive positive responses, while controversial issues like book bans or LGBTQ plus rights may face pushback. Also, despite minor shifts since 2020, consumer priorities emphasize internal actions, with 56% valuing employee care, suggesting a focus on company culture over external advocacy. So I think like the three of those bullet points together are super interesting. I mean, I think it is down because the number of people under the age of 30 who genuinely believe that brands should have a say, and they want to buy into brands that they believe in, that they identify with, who they feel share their same values, whereas in older audiences that's not as prevalent. Also, the fact that there is this sort of a split in those audiences as to what they should talk about and what they shouldn't talk about. It's not just a blanket of you should have an opinion on everything. It's really, you should have an opinion on these things and you need to stay out of this. And I think for brands, as Dan, you know all too well, we've talked about so many times, and everybody on the show knows, it is really difficult to navigate when to jump in on an issue, how to jump in on an issue, what you need to say internally versus what you need to share externally, etc. I mean, there's no right way to navigate this. There are a right number of questions to ask yourself in order to try to find the answers that are true for you. But this is a really delicate business. Spencer, I know you've had some conversations about this, being such a key member of our media team and helping brands sort of navigate what may work and what might. What do you have to add here?
Well, also as a millennial, I'm just thinking about my own values and how I look to brands for a mirroring of those values. And I'm not really too surprised by the number being halved versus 2019. Look, we had a lot of political issues, humanistic issues in the media, and we saw a lot of brands either shirk back, either through advertising dollars or just being less in the media spotlight. And I think what people are realizing, to your point, Jennifer, is it is silly to ask a brand to speak on things when a brand is not a single person, a single influencer, somebody that needs to be taken to task. We should look to our politicians, to activists, to people who are making it their life's goal to change things. I think we also saw a lot of hypocrisy where brands allied with specific causes in a very outspoken way and then were taken to task and then took back what they had previously said. And
or didn't follow through on it whatsoever and lost
didn't
that
follow
credibility.
through. And as part of like many of the communities that we have highlighted, rainbow washing is really real, pink washing is very real. And I think most of the younger generation has realized that there is no truth in these claims. Looking at it from an audio perspective, from a buying perspective, am I going to then talk to the CAOs that I work with and say, hey, if you put your trademark, your face, your messaging in a political sphere, you're aligning with that. And if you don't follow through on every single thing that they say, you're a hypocrite? No, because again, we don't hold them to task the way we do influencers. If there's a pushback, I'm going to be looking at how the audience is speaking to the media figures, but I'm not going to be like looking at every individual sponsor. That's kind of a ludicrous thing to say. And I don't think anyone actually believes in that nowadays. And we see that continually. I mean, obviously, care about your brand safety, use the tools that we advise. Content is more important and how they're framing content versus what they say. But we're about to go into election year. If you want the tune-in dollars, have at, because politics also, it pops up in almost every other thing that we advise, including comedy, including lighter fare. It's inescapable. It's part of the fabric of our lives. And that doesn't mean that you have to hold back on what you think will work for you.
Yeah, but it also doesn't mean you have to publicly draw a line in the sand and say who you're supporting. I mean, tell me one brand that doesn't have audience on both the right and the left side. I mean, even Ben & Jerry's, a very left brand, has Republicans, has people who identify sort of center or independents eating their ice cream.
Yeah,
So
everyone
what
likes.
you're saying is, sorry, go ahead.
That I just was saying everyone likes Cherry Garcia.
Everybody likes Cherry Garcia. Yeah, and look, this is why the Michael Jordan quote about Republicans buy sneakers too, is a meaningful one. And I think there's a lot of context here. We did 2 years of this show focused on these types of issues, but it's interesting because we kind of stopped focusing on that about a year ago, maybe a little longer, and the industry's matured a lot. So yeah. One of the things this report shows that I think is always going to be true is that the younger the consumer, the more they want to see them taking a position on, social issues, political issues. Older people are like, shut up and dribble. Like, we don't want to hear what you have to say. Just like focus on the
well, I don't know. I think that's taking it one step too far. I think older audiences would still boycott a brand if a brand was like vehemently against their moral compass.
I'm not talking about edge cases. I'm talking about the stats. Now, there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal that came out in the last day saying that Wall Street's ESG craze is fading. Investors pulled more than $14 billion from sustainable funds this year because they are losing. The numbers are this. When you shift your focus as a business away from the bottom line and what your customers are asking and paying for as your primary concern, you have to pull that energy from somewhere. And when you push it into causes that may or may not actually complement your business for what people hire you to do. And so it's like, look, every singer in America can give their political views from a stage, but at the end of the day, if the song sucks, you're not going to put up with that. And that's really not why you're there to begin with. And only sometimes will it overlap. So what happened was part of the reason we call this show the Media Roundtable is a nod to the Business Roundtable. And the Business Roundtable declared that corporations need to be concerned with more than just the interests of their shareholders. We need to think about stakeholders who work for the companies, who invest in the companies, who are offer supplies and services to the companies, to communities around them. I think that's generally a good thing. However, the problem that I think we saw during the pandemic is we all lost a bit of our equilibrium, and the priorities got shifted a little too much in areas that didn't allow them to protect the bottom line. And so you can have all the best intentions and do all the politically motivated things to show your values. And at the end of the day, if it's not helping the bottom line, you're going to be limited in your ability to do that. That's why I really love the Howard Schultz quote from Starbucks, where he says the price of admission for being a values-based business is financial performance. So bottom line has to stay the bottom line. If you want to make a difference on anything, I also think we saw a lot of opportunistic companies trying to leverage the sentiment at the moment that they knew they were things that were politically acceptable to say in public that would get people going, yeah, you're on the right team. Well, guess what? Now we follow up with them and we go, oh, it actually didn't help your business. And you really didn't even mean what you said. You just said it to get my attention and to pander to me. So I think it's a balance, right? And I think to what you guys were saying earlier, there are businesses that at their core are fundamentally committed to certain causes that consumers accept, and they're willing to support that. But my advice to any marketer that's listening to this show right now is to make your causes rare. Make it precious, make it mean something when you're going to do it, and make sure you're really going to put your back into it, to the foundation of your company. Because if you're just bandwagoning and, joining the panderverse, so to speak, you're going to get found out and the consumers are going to revolt and your stock price is not going to do very well in the future. And I think that that's what we're seeing here. And while we're on that topic, I'm going to get off my soapbox and move to a new topic. It's actually a cousin of the one we were just on, which is the case against brand safety. The case against brand safety. Now, you are listening to the one show that is ground zero for brand safety and suitability exploration in the audio space. So why are we talking about the case against brand safety? Well, there has been some information coming to the forefront in a number of circles about how there are media layoffs attributed to advertisers distancing themselves from content. Jezebel apparently shut their doors due to too many brand safety concerns that were causing them to get defunded, right? And so there's starting to be a kind of counter movement to say, we really don't need to be doing this, and too much of it involves tech reliance, fear-induced decision-making, and the role of ad tech vendors. And even though we are relentless advocates for a lot of the tech that is coming into that field, I'm not sure I disagree with the article, because I think that if you don't do it thoughtfully, very thoughtfully, you end up making some really arbitrary decisions, even with the right intentions. And some of these tools that even we've been involved with, I'm seeing over time that if they're not handled with care, they can do more harm than good and just reduce the number of relationships with platforms and people that can advocate for your brand. And so it's sort of interesting to see somebody saying that out loud. And frankly, I welcome the debate. I mean, Jennifer, I'm interested in your take on this one. Because, you've been in this so deeply with me trying to advocate for this sort of thing. What do you think of the pushback?
I think context is everything in regards to this pushback and in regards to brand safety and suitability. More suitability. I think pushback against the tools is not an answer to stop using the tools or to criticize that the tools are unnecessary or don't work well. I think they are a really good starting point. However, I think what needs to happen from my personal perspective is we need to sort of uncouple the GARM buckets, because the categories are too big. Like when you look at the 12 categories and you look at what's being coupled together, and then a hero score or hero risk level being applied to that entire bucket, you're actually having to make decisions that aren't helpful, using drugs and alcohol as an example. Like, you can say you want low risk, but then you can end up on a show that's talking about heroin in an educational way or even in a moderate way that could be really problematic. But if you don't want any risk, or let's say high risk, if you don't want any risk, then if they're even talking about drinking wine, it's going to flag it and you're not going to be able to buy it. So there's so many levels of nuance, and that's because each of the buckets are too big, and also what is safe and what is unsafe means different things for different brands. For example, if we look at debated sensitive social issues, which is the biggest bucket, right? There's so many topics that go into that. And Dan, you and I discussed this in great detail on Friday. And Trump, as an example, let's say, like, there are so many positions on what would be risky and what would be not risky. If you are my pillow, then everything Trump is great, but you have to say no to the entire bucket of debated sensitive social. If you are Ben and Jerry's, to bring them back into this conversation, anything Trump actually involves a lot more nuance than that. You may be okay with people saying that he was the president for a certain amount of time, but you may not be okay saying he should be the president again. And so to apply a hero score to a very, very nuanced and populated subject matter or topic block is not necessarily the right approach. And so in that regard, I think the pushback is really healthy. I think the first step was a huge step, like build tools to provide transparency into podcast. Okay, check. Now those tools need to go 5 levels deeper, and they need to be a little bit more nuanced. The tricky part is they're going to be really complicated, and they're going to be really laborious, and it's going to require more data interpretation and recommendation. So you kind of have to make the problem. We first had to have the first step of like, introduce a tool that can do this. Okay, now we need to do it. We went from a machete, and now we need a paring knife. And we need to make sure that the paring knife isn't going to be too big of a project as to where the data is overwhelming and we're not able to siphon through it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's amazing you say that. You're exactly right. We needed tools. We absolutely, and we need these tools to keep improving, right? But it's like we've got a wrecking ball, a nail gun, and a power saw, and we haven't taught anyone how to use it yet. So they're just in the market now.
Yeah.
And people don't necessarily know.
Well, and we've told people to use it because we believe they should. But again,
well, and they should. But I think that to kind of bottom line, what I think we all believe in this is that we are in a stage of reality right now that requires both tools and team. There have to be people, there has to be a human in the loop at this stage. And if you try to just give it all over to automation, you're not going to be able to apply it yet. You need humans dealing with this, helping to interpret it, or you're going to have a big problem. Anyway, we're almost out of time. We got time for one more. Stu's going to bring us home.
Yeah, quick shout out to another study. This one's from Odyssey about audio advertising and taking the approach of total audio, which I think is important to think about from a creative standpoint, that if you want to show up in radio, podcast, or streaming, what is your sonic identity? How are you showing up in all of those places? I think you've got to take this on, like I said, with a grain of salt, that it's a media company saying, hey, this works, but it's also nice to see the stats all in one place, that when you take a total audio approach across streaming and across radio, you could see some meaningful improvements in ad-directed sales. They're saying 30% lift in ad-directed sales. And they've also got nice and neat in one place, just the staggering number of people that are listening to radio every week. But the important part from a creative standpoint is, yes, you can show up in all those places. Make sure you sound the same everywhere that you do.
Indeed. And I think, look, I mean, the thing says that audio's gotten short at about $6 billion in untapped revenue. Now, yeah, consider the source. That being said, look, we work in this business. We know that pound for pound, an audio impression to a consumer has more impact to influence human behavior than potentially any other channel. Definitely it's on the short list among the top. So why is it that we have 20% of a consumer's media time and only 10% of the ad revenue? Because it's hard to use, and it's undervalued. So whether or not that just means buy more other audio channels, I wouldn't say that. Same thing as we're talking about with brand safety. You have to know how to use the thing. It's not for everybody to just go out and run indiscriminately, because it's complicated to execute. But if we can help people remove the barriers to entry and remove friction in the buying and the measurement of it, certainly it is an undervalued asset. For sure. So with that, I just want to bring us to a close here, and I want to say thank you to a number of people. This is the week of Thanksgiving, and I'm grateful to a lot of people, especially you guys. You guys have given so much for the show this year. Jennifer, Spencer, Stu, Haley. I want to shout out Bianca, Mary Jane, Everett, Scott, Kyle, the team at Podcast One, and the whole team at Oxford Road. You know, we could not do this if the team at Oxford Road wasn't helping us, whether you hear them chime in once in a while on the show, or whether they're behind the scenes just keeping the agency going so that we can continue to put thought leadership content into the world. It's very important to us. I want to also do a couple special thank yous. I think we made a lot of movement this year for the cause of audio, bringing together the chief audio officers. That wouldn't have been possible this year if it weren't for the supportive groups like Spotify, Seeker, Wondery, SiriusXM. We have some incredible clients. I can't name them all, but people that really helped us make all of this content possible just by working with us. Shopify, NetSuite, Oracle, Norton LifeLock, Indeed, Blinds.com, ZocDoc, Tommy John, Bambi, Babbel, National Debt Relief. The list goes on, and we can't thank everybody. And of course, so many of the publishers that continue to support the industry and try to take it to the next level, whether that's Pandora, SiriusXM, or Audio Boom, Wondery, Midroll, Odyssey, Westwood One, New York Times, Acast. It takes a lot of people to make this all work. And I'm just grateful for everybody's support. I think it's been a great year for the industry, and I'm really excited about what's going to happen next year. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And as always, influence responsibly.